Wayne Moyer, Political Science Department. It's a very great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Kenneth Quinn, who is the president of the World Food Prize Foundation, which is located in Des Moines, Iowa, to Grinnell College. Ambassador Quinn, since he became head of the World Food Prize in 2000, has really built the World Food Prize into now a $250,000 annual award, which has now become a Nobel Prize for Agriculture. And Ambassador Quinn has been inspired by the vision of Norman Borlaug, who many of you know, great Iowa agriculturalist and Nobel Prize winner himself, who founded the World Food Prize earlier. Prior to joining the World Food Prize, Ambassador Quinn completed a distinguished 32-year career in the U.S. Foreign Service, which culminated as the U.S. Ambassador to Cambodia. Other important assignments included service on the National Security Council, which I might say, as I just found out a little while ago, it came at a rather interesting time as Richard Nixon was resigning from office and the U.S. was removing itself from Vietnam. Other assignments, he was stationed with the U.S. mission to the United Nations in Vienna. He was chair of the U.S. Interagency Task Force on Prisoners of War Missing in Action. And he was director of Iowa Shares, the humanitarian campaign that sent Iowa doctors, nurses, medical supplies, and food to starving Cambodian refugees. He was also a very critical person in Governor Robert Ray's effort, I guess it was in the 1980s, to bring thousands of Vietnamese boat people to Iowa, which was a critical, very, very important contribution. Ambassador Quinn is a fluent speaker of Vietnamese. He served as interpreter for President Gerald Ford. He personally negotiated the first ever entry by U.S. personnel into a Vietnamese prison to search for U.S. Prisoners of war. He's received many national awards and honors, including the Secretary of State's Award for Heroism and Valor, for life-saving rescues in Vietnam, protecting American citizens in Cambodia, the White House Meritorious Honor Award for his work on behalf of refugees from Indochina, and the Presidential Distinguished Service Award for his leadership in accounting for prisoners of war and soldiers missing in action. He's also the only civilian ever to receive the U.S. Army Air Medal for his participation in helicopter combat operations in Vietnam. He is one of 3 Iowans to receive the Iowa Award. The previous 2 were Henry Wallace and Norman Borlaug, a rather distinguished group of people, which is Iowa's highest civilian honor. He's also the only State Department official to be awarded the American Foreign Service Association, Herder, and Rifkin Awards for intellectual courage and creative dissent. I emphasize the creative dissent on 3 separate occasions. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Quinn, who's going to talk, and this is an intriguing title to me, 50 Years to the Day, The Unraveling of American Power. Ambassador Quinn.
Okay, thank you. Very nice introduction. So I want to start with a Grinnell story. I've got a couple of Grinnell stories, but you heard about my getting the awards for intellectual courage and creative dissent. One of those came when I was a 32-year-old mid-level State Department officer and worried about declining excellence in the State Department. I put together a petition, got it signed by 500 officers, a bunch of ambassadors, assistant secretaries, and went up and demanded to see Cyrus Vance, the Secretary of State, so we could present our list of concerns. And along with me, and you see, now I realize the connection I didn't at the time, was George Moose. So I don't know if you know George Moose, a distinguished American ambassador, member of the board of overseers, or whatever you call it here. He and I used to study Vietnamese together as young officers. He did really well. I did poorly. He got a job in Saigon. I got a job out in the countryside in that. But you do good things here, and President Kington, and the wonderful values that are being instilled from time way back here at Cornell. I'm here to be complimented, and the school is such a treasure here. I'm especially pleased that we were able to host at the World Food Prize one of your very first award receptions in Des Moines for the Young Innovator for Social Justice Award that were created here. Congratulations to you for what you did to make that happen. I've also had the good fortune of having a couple of Grinnell students as interns at the World Food Prize. Most of them think, oh, it's agriculture, so from Iowa State they come down, and from Drake, but a wonderful young woman named Meghna Ravi Shankar. I don't know if you've come across her. Here I wrote letters for her for graduate school. She's off doing that now. And now Will Hamilton, who's here, and who has done such an incredible job that I've asked him to stay on before he goes off to the Peace Corps, to Kosovo, and this is National Peace Corps Appreciation Week, so good for you, Will. But Will's helping me pull all my memoirs together, organizing my stories, and trying to get things so I can write a memoir about my time. I think the title is going to be From the Mississippi to the Mekong, tracing that. So as I've told others that, and I should mention, of course, Joe Rosenfield and his connection, and John Crystals to John Ruan Sr. You know, they would hang around together, and with Warren Buffett and a couple of others, and they were quite remarkable. But I really got to know John Crystal well, and I have such enormous respect and admiration for him that I had a bust of him done by an artist, and it's in our Hall of Laureates in Des Moines. His name is up in the scrinches in the Iowa Gallery of the greatest figures in Iowa's humanitarian and agricultural legacy. So I have nothing but, and our highest student honor that we give to one of our high school interns that we send abroad every summer is called the John Crystal Award. So particular feel the connection and special vibe between the World Food Prize and Grinnell, and please send more possible interns, tennis players, very welcome as well. And of course, you know, I'm a big admirer of the system. I love to watch Grinnell basketball, and with 130 points a game, and I'm hooked. Grew up playing basketball in Dubuque, and had dreams of state tournament, and never got there. But I love the style that you have. I kind of think it reflects the freewheeling, innovation, and electric atmosphere here on the campus. So 50 years to the day, the unraveling of American global power. So after I sent the total, Will and I worked on the title, and the next day I said, you know, should have titled it 50 years to the day, the roots of Russian information warfare and the unraveling of American global power. And I want to explain to you my thoughts, and to understand this, you have to know that while being a kid from Loras College in Dubuque, who somehow, I got into the Foreign Service, I passed the test, got the envelope. My first thought was, they must have got my scores mixed up with somebody from Harvard or Princeton or Grinnell. But I wasn't going to argue about it. I took it and ran to Washington, and I said, I'm soon going to be in London, Paris, Vienna, going to fancy parties. And instead, they sent me to Vietnam, and not in the embassy, but as a rural development advisor. And the thread of my entire professional career in the State Department is in Vietnam, Cambodia, Indochina, in the war, seeing the Green Revolution on the battlefield, searching for POW MIAs after the war, being in the White House, translating, interpreting for the president as Saigon was falling apart, being part of the mission going to Vietnam at the end, and then refugees, and then building back together the relationship we have with Vietnam, reestablishing diplomatic relations. So in the middle of that, after the war, March 1977, Jimmy Carter, President Carter, sent a delegation to Hanoi. And I'm, being a language officer, I'm on the trip, along with Leonard Woodcock, Senator Mike Mansfield. And we land and we drive down into the center of Hanoi. I expected it would look like Dresden. There'd be nothing left. And I was stunned. It was untouched. All the trees were still there. You could always tell in Vietnam would have been affected by the war. There weren't any trees. Old trees, buildings all intact. And I'm standing there trying to figure out, gee, how could I have been so wrong in my impressions? And the second thing then is I'm standing there and I'm thinking back over this great conflict. And I said, how could it be that a country, our country, with all these nuclear weapons, with this large-scale army and military, air force and navy that had prevailed just 30 years earlier in a two-front war and defeated Germany and Japan, had lost, given up, retreated, whatever you want to say was the end, that it was the most ignominious moment of American foreign policy, that the American ambassador had to flee off the top of a building in a helicopter, being chased out of the country by the North Vietnamese army. How could that have happened? The stories I heard being around military people was, war is 90% logistics. It's all about showing up with people, ordnance, supplies, bombs, tanks. But clearly, that wasn't the critical part, the other 10%. And so I've endeavored, given my own academic background as a political science PhD, to understand it. And in searching for that, I came upon a quote attributed to Sir Robert Thompson, British counterinsurgency expert. And he said something like this, that the Americans used the most powerful weapon known to humankind, and he said mankind, in the Vietnam War. The intriguing thing is, they used it against themselves. And what he was talking about was our free press, our television in particular. That it was the images conveyed back appropriately by reporters from the battlefield that had undermined the will of the United States to carry forward and prevail in the struggle. And in looking back, it was February 27th, 50 years ago to tomorrow, that wouldn't have sounded like a good title, so it's 50. But it was to tomorrow, to the day, 1968, that Walter Cronkite went on TV. Cronkite had been in Vietnam after the Tet Offensive, which had started on January 31st. This attack all over the country. A lot of casualties, a lot of images, and the image of Viet Cong guerrillas getting into the American embassy. 500,000 troops in the country, and it appeared we could not even protect our embassy and keep the enemy from being in it. And Cronkite came back and he went on the air and he said, in part, we've been too often disappointed by the optimism of the American leaders, both in Vietnam and Washington, to have faith any longer in the silver linings they find in the darkest clouds. For it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experiences of Vietnam is to end in stalemate. Lyndon Johnson was running for re-election